At 69, I found my wife and son's secret will hidden between medical bills on our kitchen table. My hands froze when I read the line, "He receives nothing." That night, my son stood at the head of the table and said, "Dad, don't worry. We'll take care of the house when you can't anymore." My wife smiled like it was mercy. But before I folded that paper back into the envelope, I noticed one thing. They had both forgotten the deed was never as simple as they thought. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to stand up to family, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read. Just a quick note. Some details are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message this carries. At 69 years old, sitting in the cold November dawn with my 96th mortgage payment receipt in hand, I understood that the people who call you family are sometimes the ones who know you least. The bank statement sat on the kitchen table beside my black coffee, still steaming in the pre-dawn chill that seeped through the old farmhouse windows. $1,140. Auto pay like clockwork for 8 straight years. 96 consecutive months of money leaving an account my wife and son had never bothered to ask about. I took a sip of coffee, bitter the way I'd learned to like it during 34 years running Ramsey Auto Repair before I sold the shop and walked away with more money than anyone in this house ever knew I had. The burn felt good going down. Real. Through the kitchen window, early November, frost glittered on the 3-acre Canton, Ohio homestead that everyone assumed belonged to my son. My 2008 Ford pickup sat in the gravel drive paid for in cash 11 years ago with a single check that didn't even dent the nest egg I'd built turning wrenches and replacing transmissions. The truck was old now, but it ran clean. I'd made sure of that. 96 times. 8 years of auto pay, and not once did anyone in this house ask what it cost me. I heard the bedroom floor creak upstairs. Nettie, my wife of 42 years, starting her morning routine. She'd come down in 20 minutes, kiss my cheek, pour herself tea, and ask me what I wanted for dinner. The same dance we'd done for decades. She was 66 now, her hair more silver than brown, and somewhere along the way her morning kiss had started to feel like performance instead of affection. I couldn't pinpoint when that shift happened. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe I just hadn't been paying attention. But I was paying attention now. I set down my coffee and let my mind drift back 8 years to the night that changed everything, though at the time I didn't realize it would. It was late October then, too. Ross had just lost his 3rd job in 2 years, some middle management position he'd talked about like it was executive level but paid like entry-level retail. I got the call from Nettie at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, her voice fracturing over the phone as she read me the foreclosure notice that had arrived certified mail. "Lester, they're going to take the house," she'd wept. 60 days. We have 60 days. I'd sat in my apartment. I kept a small place in town. Even then told everyone it was closer to the shop. I kept a small place in town. Even then told everyone it was closer to the shop. Even after I sold the shop, I kept the apartment, spending days at the homestead out of habit, sleeping in town when I needed to think without Nettie's eyes on me, and done the math in my head. The house needed $87,000 to clear the arrears and refinance. I had 4 times that amount sitting in accounts Nettie had never seen statements for. I made the call that night, told her I'd handle it. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting across from Harold Breckenridge, the real estate attorney who'd been handling property deals in Stark County for 30 years. Harold was 63, then silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who'd seen every flavor of family financial disaster and had stopped being surprised by any of them. "Mr. Ramsey," Harold had said, sliding the refinance documents across his desk, "the person injecting capital and assuming liability must hold majority equity. That's standard practice. You'll own 65%. I'd nodded, reading every line. The house would be refinanced in my name as primary borrower. I'd bring the cash to clear the arrears. I'd hold 65% ownership. Ross and Nettie would hold 35% combined subordinate to my interest. "Where's your son?" Harold had asked, glancing at the empty chair beside me. I'd called Ross twice that evening. The first time he'd answered from somewhere loud music voices the sound of a bar or party. "Dad, I trust you. If you're handling it, that's fine. I don't need to read paperwork." The second call went to voicemail. "He's not coming," I told Harold. The attorney had looked at me with something I didn't recognize at the time. Later I understood it was pity, the kind reserved for fathers who don't yet know they're being used. Harold slid a pen across the desk. "Then let's get you protected." I signed every page, initialed every margin, brought a cashier's check for $92,000 the following week, arrears, fees, closing costs, and 6 months of reserves. Money that came from an account tied to the sale of Ramsey Auto Repair, a business I'd built from 27 years running Ramsey Auto Repair before I sold the shop, and sold in 2013 for a sum I'd never disclosed to anyone. I sold that shop to hold this family together. Back then I thought sacrifice was just what you did for love. How many times can a man pay for the same roof before he's allowed to ask who actually owns the deed underneath it? The coffee had gone lukewarm in my hands. I set the mug down and stared at the bank statement again. $1,140, 96 times over. Ross never came to that signing, never read the documents, never asked what I'd agreed to, what I'd paid, or what it meant. He'd called me the next week, voice bright and casual, asking if everything was squared away. "All set," I'd told him. "Thanks, Dad, you're a lifesaver." That was it. No follow-up, no curiosity. He'd gone back to his life assuming the house was still his, that I'd simply paid off a problem the way fathers do. But that wasn't what I'd done. What I'd done was take majority ownership of every board, nail, shingle, and acre of the property Ross thought he'd inherit. I'd become his landlord, his creditor, and the legal decision-maker for the home he walked through like he owned it. And he never bothered to ask. Harold had seen this before. I could tell by the way he capped his pen without a word and slid the folder closed. Upstairs I heard the shower turn on. Nettie would be down in 15 minutes now, right on schedule. I folded the bank statement, slipped it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the drawer where I kept 8 years of identical records. 96 payments. 96 pieces of evidence that I'd been carrying this family on my back while they made plans I was just beginning to understand. Ross's refusal to show up that night, his dismissive arrogance, his assumption that paperwork didn't matter, it had all seemed like typical laziness at the time. 8 years later, that lack of curiosity would prove to be the most expensive mistake of his life. The papers I signed didn't just save the house, they made me the majority owner of it. And Ross never bothered to ask. That ignorance had been sitting between us for 8 years, like an invisible wall, but in the last 6 months, something had shifted. Ross had stopped pretending to be grateful and started acting like he owned the place. Last Sunday, late October, he carved the pot roast from the head of the table. Not a guest seat, not the side chair he'd occupied since childhood. The head of the table, the seat that had belonged to me for 42 years while I sat 3 places down like a visiting uncle. Nettie had set the table that way without comment. The good china, the linen napkins, the centerpiece of bronze chrysanthemums she'd arranged that morning. Ross pulled out the chair, sat down, and picked up the carving knife like it had always been his. I watched in silence, fork resting against my plate. Margot Whitaker sat to his right, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. She was 34, a real estate broker, with a sharp eye for property value and the kind of smile that looked warm until you realized it never reached her eyes. Her gaze moved around the dining room, tracking the crown molding the original hardwood floors, the south-facing windows like a contractor evaluating demolition potential. "This house has wonderful bones," she said, cutting into her roast. "Original timber, solid foundation. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." "It's been in the family a long time," Nettie said, her voice bright and performative. Lester's done so much work on it over the years. Margot smiled. Sweat equity, that's valuable. Ross leaned back in my chair, and draped his arm across the back of Margot's seat. We've been talking about some commercial opportunities, real estate development. There's a lot of potential in this area if you know how to leverage assets correctly. What kind of assets? I asked. Ross waved his hand dismissively. Dad, let's not discuss line items in front of guests. I set down my fork. 38 times. That was the 38th time in 6 months I'd swallowed a question because the timing wasn't right, because it would cause a scene, because keeping the peace seemed more important than getting an answer. I was starting to understand that peace bought with silence isn't peace at all. Margot's eyes flicked to the built-in hutch against the east wall, then to the bay window overlooking the back acreage. She wasn't admiring the view. She was calculating square footage. The pot roast tasted like sawdust in my mouth, but I chewed methodically, keeping my face neutral. Nettie refilled Ross's water glass before mine. Small gesture, unconscious maybe, or maybe not. In every family there's a throne. Sometimes it's just a chair at the end of a wooden table, but everyone knows who's supposed to sit in it and what it means when someone else does. Ross had claimed it, and nobody at that table had said a word. I excused myself after dessert, walked out to the back porch, and stood in the cold October air watching the sun drop behind the barn. My breath misted in the chill. Somewhere behind me I heard Margot laughing at something Ross said, her voice carrying through the kitchen window. And I thought about May. It had been a Tuesday midday, unseasonably warm for early spring. I'd been working in the backyard garden, turning soil between the tomato plants Nettie had asked me to stake. The sun was hot on my neck. I remember the smell of fresh earth, the sound of a cardinal calling from the oak tree, the weight of the shovel in my hands. Then the pain hit sudden, crushing, radiating from my chest down my left arm like someone had wrapped my rib cage in barbed wire and yanked it tight. I went down hard knees first, then shoulder collapsing into the row of tomatoes I'd just planted. The sky tilted. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint of blue. I heard Nettie's voice, distant and sharp, calling my name. Then footsteps. Then her phone, the beep of the keypad. But she didn't call 911. She called Ross. "Get over here right now," she said, her voice fracturing with panic. "Your father is down." I heard her pacing, heard her breathing, heard the gravel crunch under her shoes as she circled me, phone pressed to her ear, talking to our son while I lay in the dirt with my heart misfiring like a bad alternator. It wasn't until minutes later, 3, maybe 4, I couldn't track time clearly, that she finally dialed 911. By the time the paramedics arrived, I was barely conscious. By the time they got me to Mercy Medical Center and threaded a stent through my femoral artery to clear the blockage, I'd been stabilized, sedated, and moved to recovery. Ross showed up 2 hours after the procedure. He walked into my hospital room wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt, his hair freshly combed, his face arranged in an expression of concern that looked rehearsed. "Sorry I'm late, Dad," he said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "Traffic was brutal." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The morphine drip kept the pain at bay, but my mind was sharp enough to notice details, like the dark smear on his right elbow. Differential oil. Unmistakable. The thick, pungent grease that comes from working on a vehicle's rear axle, the kind that gets under your fingernails and stains fabric in a way that doesn't wash out easily. I'd spent 34 years in auto repair. I knew that stain the way a vintner knows wine. Ross was unemployed, had been for 8 months at that point, ever since losing the retail management position he'd held for 11 months. No job, no income, living off what Nettie quietly slipped him from the household budget I funded. But he had differential oil on his sleeve. Lying on that hospital bed, staring at acoustic ceiling tiles with a fresh stent in my chest, I understood that Nettie had called our son before she called the people who could save my life. And I understood that Ross had been somewhere working on a vehicle when he got that call, not sitting idle at home, not unemployed, but actively engaged in something he wasn't telling anyone about. I didn't ask him about it. The morphine made my tongue thick, and the nurse was checking my vitals, and the moment passed. But I filed that detail away like a receipt, unnecessary for now, but never to be thrown away. That's the investigator's habit I learned over 3 decades of diagnosing engine problems. Every piece of evidence has its hour. You don't need to understand what it means immediately. You just need to remember it. A grease stain on the sleeve of an unemployed man. Small thing, easy to miss. But I didn't miss it. I collected evidence the way other men collect stamps, methodically, without emotion, filed in mental drawers for later use. The grease stain joined the growing inventory, 96 payments, the usurped chair, Nettie's call order, Margot's surveying eyes. I didn't know what I was building yet, but I knew I was building something. The unsealed envelope arrived on a Friday evening in early November. Nettie handed me a brown expandable document folder as she cleared dinner dishes. "Could you organize the medical bills since you're better with numbers?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm going to bed early. Headache." She kissed my cheek, performance not affection, and disappeared upstairs. I sat alone at the kitchen table under the single desk lamp, the rest of the house dark and quiet. The folder was rubber-banded shut, stuffed full of papers. I spread the contents across the table. Insurance forms from May, Medicare statements, pharmacy receipts, bills from Mercy Medical Center itemizing the stent placement and overnight observation, and at the bottom an unsealed white envelope, legal size, heavy cotton paper, embossed letterhead and raised black lettering, Kingsley Redmond, attorney at law, Canton, Ohio. I'd never heard the name before. The flap was tucked in, not sealed. I pulled out 3 pages of folded documents, my hands steady from 15 years working fraud investigations for the county before I bought the auto shop. Last will and testament of Nettie Marie Ramsey. I read the first page slowly. Standard boilerplate, revocation of prior wills, appointment of executor, sound mind, no undue influence. Second page, distribution of assets. I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my residual estate, including but not limited to all real property, personal property, financial accounts, and any interest in jointly held assets to my son Ross, Michael Ramsey, absolutely and in fee simple. 100%, everything. Third page, 1 sentence buried in a paragraph about spousal rights. The husband has been amply provided for throughout the duration of the marriage via independent means and shall therefore take no share of the residual estate. I read it again, then a third time. Amply provided for. 8 years, 96 mortgage payments, $87,000 poured into saving a house from foreclosure while my son sat in bars and my wife signed documents erasing me from the future. Amply provided for. I set the pages down carefully, aligning the edges with the table's grain. My hands were steady. My pulse was calm. The kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the wall clock's tick. How do you measure a man's worth in a legal document? By the bills he paid or by the space he's given when the estate is divided? I walked to the cabinet above the sink and pulled down the bottle of rye whiskey I kept behind the cooking sherry. I only drank rye when I was working a case. The burn helped me think clearly, stripped away emotional noise, and left only facts. I poured 2 fingers into a rocks glass. Amber, liquid, sharp smell of grain and oak. Set it on the table beside the will and stared at both. The envelope wasn't sealed. That mattered. Unsealed meant recent access, active use, not filed away in a vault. Current, in play. I checked the date at the top of the first page, October 18th, 2024. 2 weeks ago. Drafted and signed while I was still making payments, still sitting at this table, drinking coffee, still playing the role of husband and father and family ATM. Kingsley Redmond's name appeared at the bottom, witness signature, notary seal, the bureaucratic machinery turning betrayal into legally binding documents. I'd never met this attorney, never heard Nettie mention him. Never saw a bill or retainer agreement, which meant she'd paid him with money I didn't track. I took a sip of the rye. It burned, going down sharp and clean. In 15 years of tracking down scammers, I learned one thing. The moment you stop feeling angry is the exact moment you start working. I should have been furious. Should have stormed upstairs, demanded explanations. Should have felt rage, grief, the betrayal of 42 years reduced to a dismissive sentence. But I didn't. I felt cold, clinical. The same detachment I used to feel sitting across from welfare fraudsters who lied about disabled children or hidden income. I felt like an investigator again, and that terrified me more than the will itself. Because when I slipped into that mode, the fraud examiner, the evidence collector, the man who built cases brick by brick until the walls closed in, I didn't stop until I had every answer, every document, every lie cataloged and ready for prosecution. I picked up the will again, reading not for emotion but for gaps. What wasn't said, what was implied, what questions it raised. Why wasn't the envelope sealed? Why was it in medical bills instead of filed properly? When had Nettie first contacted Kingsley Redmond? Did Ross know about this? Did Margot? How many other documents existed that I hadn't seen? I folded the pages carefully, slipped them back into the envelope, and placed it exactly where I'd found it. Tucked the medical bills on top, rubber banded the folder shut, left everything exactly as Nettie had handed it to me. Then I picked up my glass of rye, walked to the sink, and poured it down the drain. I didn't need whiskey to think clearly. I needed to be invisible. I didn't feel angry, and that's what scared me. Being invisible meant acting normal. It meant showing up to Sunday dinner, passing the mashed potatoes, and saying nothing about the will, because the first rule of investigation is never let the target know you found the evidence. The following Sunday, mid-November, 3 weeks after the first time I'd watched Ross take my chair, I sat 3 chairs down again and watched the same performance with different costumes. This time, Margot had brought a leather portfolio, with the same carving knife I'd used for 42 years. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his movements confident and proprietary. Margot sat to his right, her gaze drifting across the dining room walls like she was already redecorating in her mind. She'd dressed carefully, cashmere sweater, delicate gold necklace, the kind of studied casual that cost more than it looked. Nettie set down a bowl of green beans and took her seat. The good china, the linen napkins, the same bronze chrysanthemums from last week starting to wilt at the edges. "So," Ross said, setting down the carving fork and looking at me with the expression of someone about to deliver good news. "Margot and I have been talking, and we think it's time we move back permanently to handle the heavy lifting for you two. This acreage needs younger hands." Not a question, not a request, a declaration. Nettie smiled, her hands folded in her lap. "That's so thoughtful, sweetheart." Margot reached over and squeezed Ross's hand. "We want to help. Really invest in this place, you know. Give it the care it deserves." I cut into my roast, chewing slowly. The meat was tender, well-seasoned, tasted like ash in my mouth. "And how do you plan to contribute to the property taxes and monthly overhead, Ross?" I asked, my voice even and curious. Ross's smile tightened. "Dad, let's not ruin a family dinner with accounting." Nettie jumped in quickly, her voice bright. "Lester, pass the rolls, would you? These are fresh from the bakery." I passed the rolls. Margot's eyes tracked the crown molding along the ceiling, then dropped to the hardwood floors, then moved to the south-facing windows. She wasn't admiring the craftsmanship. She was measuring square footage, calculating load-bearing walls, assessing renovation potential. There's a difference between living in a house and owning the deed. Margot was measuring the first while being completely ignorant of the second. "We're thinking late January for the move," Ross continued, loading his plate with mashed potatoes. "Gives us time to sort out logistics, pack up my apartment, get organized." "That sounds perfect," Nettie said. I nodded, took a sip of water, and said nothing. The conversation drifted to safer topics. Weather, Thanksgiving plans, a neighbor's new roof. I responded when spoken to, past dishes when asked, and kept my face neutral. Invisible. 3 days later, Wednesday night, I was in my workshop office, a converted corner of the detached garage where I kept the filing cabinets for business records and the old desktop computer I still used for email. The space smelled like motor oil and sawdust, familiar and grounding. I was reviewing mortgage autopay confirmations when my phone pinged with a notification. "Margot Whitaker has added you to the board, our forever home." I stared at the screen for 3 seconds, then opened the app. 38 images loaded in a grid. High-resolution photos pulled from design magazines and contractor websites. White farmhouse sinks with industrial faucets. Reclaimed wood floating shelves. Wide plank oak flooring in a shade 3 tones lighter than what we had. Shiplap accent walls. Edison bulb pendant lights hanging over a kitchen island that didn't currently exist. I scrolled slowly, my thumb moving across the screen with mechanical precision. One image showed the dining room with red marker lines drawn across the wall between the kitchen and living room. Annotation in Margot's handwriting, load-bearing demo cost $8,000. Another showed the upstairs bathroom gutted to studs. New tile, freestanding soaking tub, frameless glass shower. Estimated cost $14,200. I kept scrolling. The most recent upload was a scanned contractor estimate on official letterhead. Line items for demolition, framing, electrical, plumbing, finish, carpentry. Total at the bottom in bold $67,400. The caption beneath it read, "Contractor estimate first phase. Ross says mom can cover the initial deposit from the joint savings account. Closing consult scheduled for December 10th. I saved every single image. The joint savings account. The one Nettie and I opened in 1998. The one I'd been rebuilding over the last 8 years, depositing $2,000 every quarter from the accounts she didn't know about. The balance sat at just over $93,000. They were planning to use my money to demolish the walls of my house. I took a screenshot of the contractor estimate, then another of the load-bearing wall markup, then every single image in the board one by one, methodical and thorough. I created a new folder on my desktop evidence home, saved all 38 screenshots with timestamps and file names that matched the board's upload order. Then I went back to the app and checked the member list. Margot Whitaker admin, Ross Ramsey, Nettie Ramsey, Lester Ramsey. I could have removed myself. One tap and my name would disappear from the list. They'd never know I'd seen it. But I didn't. I left my name right there in the member list where Margot had placed it, visible and active, because sometimes the best evidence is the evidence a thief hands you directly. They thought I was too old to understand Pinterest boards and contractor apps. Thought I'd see the notification, get confused, maybe ask Nettie to help me figure out what it meant. They were wrong. I set down my phone and leaned back in the metal folding chair, the cold November air seeping through the garage walls. My breath misted slightly in the unheated space. $67,400, a deposit drawn from savings I'd rebuilt one careful transfer at a time. To demolish load-bearing walls in a house I still owned 65% of. I saved every single image, left my name on the member list. Sometimes the best evidence is the stuff a thief hands you himself because he thinks you're too blind to read it. I'd spent 15 years learning that criminals always leave evidence, sometimes in spreadsheets, sometimes in forged signatures, sometimes in Pinterest boards they think you're too old to understand. What I hadn't expected was for evidence to call me directly. The phone rang at 11:23 p.m. on Thursday night. I was lying in the dark bedroom of my apartment in Canton, the small place I'd kept separate from the homestead, the place no one in my family visited, staring at the ceiling and running through mental inventories. 96 payments, the will, the renovation board, Ross's grease-stained sleeve. The phone screen lit up the darkness. Unlisted number. Local area code. I answered on the third ring. Hello. Silence. Not the empty silence of a dropped call or a robocall delay. This silence had weight, presence. The kind that comes with someone on the other end holding their breath. I waited, phone pressed to my ear, listening. Then I heard it, shallow, ragged breathing. The distinct sound of someone trying to stay quiet while their respiration gave them away. In, out, uneven, frightened. I'm here, I said quietly. You can talk. The breathing hitched, held. Then the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. Call ended. Duration 47 seconds. I saved the number in my contacts unknown Canton. Then I lay back against the pillow and thought about silence. In 15 years of fraud investigations, I learned to identify the physiological difference between the silence of an accidental caller and the silence of a witness who wants to speak but lacks the courage. This one was terrified, and terrified people usually have a damn good reason. Someone else in this small town knew what was happening inside that house, knew enough to find my number, knew enough to call at midnight when no one would overhear, but didn't know how to say it out loud yet. I stared at the dark ceiling, listening to the radiator tick and hiss as it cycled on, and wondered who else was watching. Saturday afternoon, late November, brought cold gray skies and the smell of wet leaves decaying in the yard. I was in the detached tool shed behind the garage cleaning an old lawnmower carburetor with solvent and a wire brush when Milo showed up. He was 9 years old, small for his age, with Ross's dark hair and Nettie's sharp eyes. He wore a puffy winter coat 3 sizes too big, and sneakers that lit up when he walked, the kind of shoes his father would have mocked as impractical, but that every kid his age wanted. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, dragging a low wooden stool across the concrete floor and settling onto it with his legs swinging. "Hey, kiddo, what brings you out here?" "Dad's doing sales calls. Mom said I should stay out of the way." Sales calls. That's what Ross called whatever he did in the garage bay at the far end of the property, the one with the roll-up door and the oil stains on the concrete that never quite washed away. I dipped the carburetor into the solvent pan, watching the old fuel residue dissolve. The sharp chemical smell filled the small shed, familiar and grounding. Milo swung his legs back and forth, watching me work. Then, without preamble, "Grandpa, is this house yours or Daddy's?" I paused mid-scrub, the wire brush hovering over the carburetor's fuel bowl. Kept my voice casual. "Why do you ask?" "I heard Daddy and Margot talking yesterday in the kitchen." He picked at a loose thread on his coat sleeve. "Daddy said this house is already his and you're just staying here until you get too old." The wire brush slipped slightly in my grip. I set it down carefully on the workbench, wiped my hands on an oil-stained rag, and turned to look at my grandson. His legs had stopped swinging. "What are we fixing right now?" I asked. Milo blinked. "The carburetor." "And who's the only one in this yard who knows exactly how the fuel flows through it?" He thought about that for a second. "You, Grandpa." I turned back to the workbench, picked up the carburetor, and examined the needle valve with my reading glasses perched on the end of my nose. "That's right." Milo stared at me, his small face trying to process the answer that wasn't really an answer. He didn't fully understand he was 9, and the mechanics of property ownership were well beyond him, but he recognized the absolute authority in the response. Children reveal the truth. Adults try to hide, not because they're trying to expose secrets, but because they haven't yet learned which conversations are supposed to stay behind closed doors. Ross was already telling his own son that I was a temporary occupant. Just an old man staying in someone else's house until age made me too inconvenient to keep around. The narrative was being built in real time, brick by brick, normalized in the mind of a 9-year-old who would grow up believing his grandfather had been nothing more than a tenant. "Grandpa?" Milo's voice was quieter now. "Yeah, kiddo. Are you gonna get too old?" I set down the carburetor and looked at him directly. His eyes were wide, worried in the way children get when they sense adult problems they can't name. "Not for a long time," I said. "And when I do, I'll make sure you understand exactly how things work. Fair." He nodded slowly. "Fair. Now hand me that flathead screwdriver, the small one." He jumped off the stool and rummaged through my toolbox until he found it, then handed it over with the careful reverence kids reserve for being trusted with real tools. I went back to work on the carburetor, and Milo climbed back onto his stool legs, swinging again. Crisis temporarily resolved in the way only childhood allows. But I wasn't going to let him grow up believing his grandfather was an old tenant paying rent on a house he'd built with his own sweat and money. That wasn't the inheritance I intended to leave behind. The mysterious phone call, Milo's innocent question, the renovation board, the will. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. My family believed I was already gone, just a ghost occupying space until they could make it official. They were wrong, and I was going to prove it. Proving them wrong required evidence, and evidence I'd learned over 15 years of fraud investigation had a way of arriving exactly when you stopped looking for it and started being patient. The notification lit up my phone at 9:17 p.m. on Monday, November 25th. I was sitting in the living room of my apartment, half watching the local evening news channel. 7, same station I'd watched for 20 years, same anchor desk, same weather maps when the screen flashed blue in the dim light. Margot Whitaker has added you to the group chat Christmas Logistics. I stared at the notification for 3 seconds before opening it. The thread loaded. 47 previous messages time-stamped across the last 6 days. I scrolled to the top and started reading in chronological order. November 19th, 8:42 p.m. Ross. The old man is just a breathing wallet at this point. Let him cover the mortgage for a few more cycles, then the title transfer goes live. November 20th, 10:15 a.m. Margot. How confident are you with Kingsley we can't have any loose ends? November 20th, 11:03 a.m. Ross. Kingsley is locked in. He's been working estate law for 30 years. Knows every probate judge in Stark County. November 21st, 3:27 p.m. Nettie. I took care of the signature verification with Holt. The new will is sealed. The old man won't have a single legal leg to stand on. November 22nd, 9:58 p.m. Ross. Medical guardianship and conservatorship filing goes to Kingsley next week. Once that's in motion, we control everything: bank accounts, property decisions, medical care, the whole estate. November 23rd, 7:14 a.m. Margot. Will the judge interview him directly? November 23rd, 7:19 a.m. Ross. He can't even remember what station the evening news is on. He'll execute the case against himself just by talking. November 25th, 9:02 p.m. Margot. By Christmas morning, he'll be on his knees thanking us for taking care of everything. Then we pull the trigger on phase 2. I kept scrolling. More messages, contractor timelines, demolition schedules, a scanned image of the renovation estimate I'd already seen. A joke from Ross about the old man's face when he realizes the garage bay is getting converted into Margot's home office. They were talking about me like I was already dead. Guardianship and conservatorship. I'd seen those exact tools used to strip 3 elderly estates clean. I knew every crack in that armor. I took a screenshot of the first message, then the second, then every single one, methodical and fast, my thumb moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. 90 seconds after I'd opened the thread, typing dots appeared at the bottom. Ross Ramsey is typing. Then the screen flickered. You have been removed from Christmas Logistics. I stared at the message for 5 seconds. Then I opened my photo gallery and counted. 47 screenshots, every message, every timestamp, every participant's name clearly visible. 90 seconds. In 15 years as an investigator, I'd never had a target hand me an unredacted confession directly on a silver platter. I set down the phone, leaned back on the couch, and listened to the weather forecast drone on about cold fronts and lake effect snow advisories. The television anchor said something about safe driving conditions. I thought about breathing wallets and Christmas mornings and judges who would listen to a man fumble his way through testimony about which news station he watched. Channel 7. Same station for 20 years, same desk, same maps. They say luck favors the prepared. I've been getting prepared for 8 years, one mortgage payment at a time, and now they've handed me the confession I needed. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I sat at my bedroom desk under the single brass lamp I used for paperwork. The heavy brown leather-bound investigation ledger sat in front of me, the same type I'd used for 15 years, logging field investigations, tracking evidence chains, building cases that held up in court and resulted in convictions. The leather was worn smooth at the edges, the spine cracked from use. I opened it to a fresh white page. At the top, in clean block lettering, I wrote Case File, The Ramsey Alliance, open November 25th, 2024. Then I drew 3 vertical lines creating columns. First column, evidence secured. I listed each item with the same precision I'd used documenting welfare fraud and disability scams. Group chat screenshots, 47 messages time-stamped. Renovation board images, 38 files. Contractor estimates $67,400. Unsealed, will dated October 18th, 2024. Attorney Kingsley Redmond. Refinance documents 8 years prior. 65% ownership secured. Mortgage auto pay records. 96 consecutive payments. $1,140 monthly. Ross's differential oil stain. May 2024. Unemployed status contradicted. Second column, evidence required. Ross's unrecorded curbstoning cash flow, illegal vehicle flipping, verify via county sales records, fraudulent transfer deeds. Kingsley is drafting subpoena attorney records if necessary. Exact dates of Nettie's meetings with Kingsley, established timeline of conspiracy. Medical guardianship petition documents obtained before filing to preempt. Financial account access logs, verify if unauthorized withdrawals have occurred. Third column, tactical actions. Engage Alvin Spencer, independent audit legal strategy consultation. Audit red metal toolbox, verify cash reserve remains intact. Establish independent legal counsel outside Canton, avoid local conflicts of interest. Document all future family interactions, recording device written logs. Secure original refinance deed in safety deposit box, prevent document tampering. At the bottom of the page, I wrote one final line and underlined it twice. Do not strike until the perimeter is absolute. Patience is the only weapon that never jams. I set down the pen and stared at the page. This was the 201st case file I'd opened in my career, but it was the first time the primary targets called me Dad. I closed the ledger, the leather cover falling shut with a soft thud that sounded louder in the silent room. Killed the lamp. Sat in the darkness for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Outside the window, Canton was disappearing under a fresh layer of winter frost. Streetlights haloed in the cold. The neighborhood silent except for the distant hum of a snowplow working the main road. Inside, a machine had just started humming, and this one didn't come with an off switch. The first gear in that machine was Alvin Spencer, and I'd been waiting 8 years to pull him into motion. Tuesday morning, November 26th. I slid the manila folder across the scarred diner table to the one man in Canton who'd spent 30 years catching white-collar criminals for the IRS and who'd been my best friend for 40. The diner sat near the old industrial rail line, the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee at 5 in the morning and the waitress knew your order before you sat down. Corner booth, cracked vinyl seats, 2 cups of black coffee already steaming between us. Low acoustic music hummed from the kitchen speakers, just loud enough to mask conversation. Alvin Spencer was 71, still sharp as the auditor he'd been for 3 decades before retirement. Silver hair, cropped military short reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Hands that moved with the deliberate precision of someone who'd spent a career dismantling financial crimes, one receipt at a time. He opened the folder without a word and started reading. I watched him work through the evidence. The group chat screenshots, the renovation board images, the unsealed will with its single dismissive sentence about independent means. The timeline I'd typed out connecting dots from the refinance 8 years ago to the guardianship petition they were preparing to file. His pen scratched brief lines into a small black memo book, the same kind he'd carried for 30 years, filled with notes that became federal cases. A reflex. Investigator muscle memory. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask clarifying questions, just read, absorbed, documented. Men who spent 30 years catching tax evaders don't require empty reassurances or long explanations. They just listen, take notes, and start building the trap. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Do you still have the complete closing folder from the refinance?" he asked. I nodded. Every page, original signatures, notarized deed, title insurance policy. Alvin tapped his pen against the edge of his coffee cup, thinking. The sound was rhythmic, methodical. Outside the window, a freight train rumbled past on the old rail line, rattling the glass in its frame. "Good," he said finally. "That's our anchor. Give me 48 hours to check the federal loan registries. I've got an old key that might fit this lock, but I need to make sure the bank hasn't changed the cylinders." I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, overbrewed, perfect. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking your son is about to learn the difference between planning a crime and executing one." He closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "Don't say a word at home. Act normal. Let them think you're still the breathing wallet." "That won't be hard." Alvin almost smiled. 40 years, Lester. I haven't backed the wrong horse yet." He stood, dropped a $10 bill on the table for the coffee, and walked out without looking back. I sat there for another 5 minutes, watching the steam rise from my cup, listening to the clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the low murmur of truckers at the counter discussing weather and road conditions. Then I drove home and started searching for the anchor. Wednesday afternoon, I descended to the basement workshop, the unfinished concrete space beneath the apartment where I kept my tools and the things I didn't want anyone else to find. The heavy red Craftsman toolbox sat beneath the oak workbench exactly where I'd left it 8 years ago. 5 feet wide, industrial-grade steel, the kind mechanics use when they've accumulated a lifetime of precision instruments. I dragged it out, the casters squeaking against the concrete floor, opened the top lid, lifted the removable upper tray socket sets, wrenches, screwdrivers organized by size. Beneath it, a false sheet metal floor. I'd installed it myself 15 years ago, back when I was still working fraud investigations and needed a secure place to keep sensitive documents away from the office. The compartment was shallow, but wide and visible, unless you knew to look for the 2 recessed finger holes at the edges. I pulled up the false floor. Inside rested a thick blue plastic folder, the kind lawyers use for closing packages. I lifted it out carefully, set it on the workbench under the single overhead halogen bulb. The folder was labeled in black marker "Refinance 2016 Final." I unfolded the certified copy of the warranty deed, spreading it flat on the scarred wooden surface. The paper was heavy, official, embossed with the Stark County Recorder's seal. I read the legal description line by line: property address, parcel number, meets and bounds, easements and encumbrances. Then halfway down the second page, under the heading Ownership Interest, 65% majority tenant in common ownership share, Lester Eugene Ramsey, primary title holder. 35% minority tenant in common ownership share, Nettie Marie Ramsey and Ross Michael Ramsey jointly. I'd spent 8 years thinking I was helping my family stay afloat, never realizing I was actually securing my own legal fortress, and they'd been too arrogant to check the blueprints. My name sat at the absolute top of the registry, not a cosigner, not a guarantor, primary title holder with majority ownership. I sat down on my workshop stool, the metal cold through my jeans, and stared at the document. A will can only distribute what the deceased actually owns when they draw their last breath. Nettie's will left everything to Ross. 100% of her estate, the group chat had said. The house, the property, all assets. But Nettie only owned 17.5%. Ross owned the other 17.5%. Together, they controlled 35% of the property they were planning to renovate, demolish, and rebuild with my money. I owned the other 65%, had owned it for 8 consecutive years. I sat motionless for 10 minutes, listening to the furnace cycle on in the corner. The whoosh of forced air through the ductwork, the distant hum of traffic on the street above. Then I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a yellow highlighter, the exact tool I'd used for 15 years to isolate fraudulent clauses in auto insurance claims, welfare applications, disability petitions. I uncapped it and drew a clean, bright line beneath the percentage. 65%. That house Ross was already measuring for new floors. The property Margot was designing with white farmhouse sinks and load-bearing wall demolitions. 65% of it belonged to me. It had belonged to me since the night he was too busy to show up and read the paperwork. Ownership was the foundation. What Alvin was about to hand me was the leverage to turn that foundation into a fortress. Friday morning, November 29th. Same diner booth, same black coffee. Alvin slid a single sheet of typed paper across the scarred table 48 hours after our first meeting, and the plan written on it would turn me from property owner into the bank itself. 2 operations, he said, tapping the paper with his index finger. First, the mortgage note. I leaned forward. I called an old IRS connection at the commercial lending bank holding your note. They're aggressively clearing non-performing assets before the Q4 ledger closes December 31st. Your loan isn't non-performing, but it's classified as legacy retail small balance low yield administrative burden. They want it off their books. And the Mac Iron Trust can purchase the distressed note at a 38% discount. I submitted a formal offer this morning. The credit committee needs 2 weeks to ratify, but the prelim feedback is favorable. I stared at him. You're saying I can buy my own mortgage? Not just buy it, own it. You'd hold the note. You'd be Ross's secured lender. If he defaults on a single payment after the transfer closes, you foreclose. He wouldn't just lose his inheritance, he'd lose his credit, his collateral, everything. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. I didn't touch it. Second operation, Alvin continued, his voice dropping slightly. Controlled confusion. What's that? You start acting senile, at home, in front of them. Misplace your keys, forget names, repeat questions, make them think you're sliding fast. I frowned. Why? Because an arrogant marksman always rushes his shot when he thinks the target is stationary. I've seen hundreds of tax evaders wrap the noose around their own necks the second they thought they were smarter than the room. If Ross believes you're mentally declining, he'll accelerate his timeline. He'll make mistakes. He'll document things he shouldn't. And you'll be there collecting every piece of evidence he hands you. In 30 years investigating tax fraud, I learned this. Criminals always talk too much when they think the room is empty, and they always rush the end game when they think their target is weak. How long do I maintain it? Until the credit committee closes the note purchase. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Can you do it? I thought about the group chat, the breathing wallet, the renovation board, the will. Yeah, I said, I can do it. That evening I started the performance. I misplaced my truck keys in the sugar bowl. Left them there for Nettie to find while I wandered the kitchen looking confused. Lester, they're right here, she said, holding them up with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, thank you, dear. At dinner, I asked her 3 times to identify the evening news anchor's name. Channel 7, Nettie? What's that fellow's name again, the one with the gray hair? David Marshall, Lester, same as always. Right, David Marshall. 5 minutes later. Nettie, remind me, what's that anchor's name on Channel 7? Her expression shifted from irritation to something else. Calculation. David Marshall, honey, are you feeling okay? Just tired. At 9:47 p.m., I was in my workshop when I heard Ross's voice coming through the side door I'd left cracked open. He was on his cell phone, pacing near the driveway. Mom, the old man is sliding fast, he said, his voice low and urgent. I'm serious. He asked you the same question 3 times tonight. We need to move the paperwork up before he forgets how to hold a pen. I stood perfectly still in the darkness, listening. Yeah, I'll call Kingsley first thing Monday morning. Get the petition filed by mid-December at the latest. Once the judge signs the conservatorship, we control the accounts, the property decisions, everything. He won't be able to contest it if he can't remember his own address. A pause. Love you too, Mom. The call ended. I heard his footsteps crunch across the gravel, then the sound of his car door opening and closing. I quietly shut the workshop door, walked to my desk, and opened the case ledger under the single brass lamp. Entry number 4, December 2024. Subject overheard coordinating accelerated guardianship timeline with co-conspirator. Petition filing target mid-December. Evidence recorded confirmation via direct observation. Monday night, December 2nd, the phone rang at 11:45 p.m. I was in bed, half asleep, when the screen lit up the dark room. Unlisted Canton number, the third call. I answered and said nothing. Silence on the other end. But this time the silence broke. A woman's voice, hushed and strained, speaking in a rapid whisper like someone broadcasting from a locked room. Lester, listen to me. I know what they're writing down with attorney Kingsley Redmond. I couldn't say anything before, but I have a logbook. I have the dates. Since June. I sat upright, my feet hitting the cold floorboards. Who is this? I asked quietly. A sudden floorboard creak echoed on her end, the unmistakable sound of someone else moving in the same house. Her whisper turned frantic. I have to go. I'll find you. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. June 2024. 1 month after I collapsed in the garden with a tomato cage in my hands. 1 month after the stent went into my chest, Nettie was already meeting with an attorney to write me out of my own life. I opened the case ledger under the desk lamp and wrote in careful block letters, potential witness. Female Canton resident, direct knowledge of Kingsley Redmond, possesses contemporaneous notes dating back to June 2024. Do not press. Let the fruit fall on its own. I closed the ledger and sat in the dim light, listening to the house settle around me. June. They started planning this transition while I was still lying in a sterile recovery room with plastic tubes pumping oxygen into my chest while nurses checked my vitals every 4 hours, while I learned to breathe again around the foreign metal holding my artery open. Nettie had sat beside my hospital bed, held my hand, whispered that everything would be okay. And 1 month later, she was in an attorney's office drafting documents to erase me. They say bad people think they're alone in the world. That night I realized how wrong they are. Knowing when they started wasn't enough. I needed to know what legal protections already existed. Protections they'd forgotten about, buried in documents older than their conspiracy. Thursday morning, early December, I descended into the Canton Public Library basement archives, searching for a fragment of memory from 1987, a protective covenant Nettie's parents had mentioned once 37 years ago that my family had long since forgotten. The archives smelled like old paper and dust, the kind of institutional decay that comes from decades of records stacked in climate-controlled darkness. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. 2 microfiche machines sat against the far wall, their screens glowing pale green. Leather-bound registries lined metal shelves floor to ceiling, organized by decade and document type. I spent 3 hours auditing historic Stark County probate records from the late 1980s. Nettie's parents had died within 6 months of each other in 1987, her father first, her mother shortly after. The property had transferred to Nettie through their estate. I remembered sitting at their kitchen table the year before they passed, listening to her father talk about protecting the homestead from bad actors and fraudsters. He'd been a careful man, a planner. I found it on the 4th microfiche reel. Last will and testament of Harold and Margaret Fletcher, probated April 1987, Stark County Probate Court. I scrolled through the boilerplate executor appointments, asset distributions, standard legal language. Then on page 7, clause 7, in the event that any designated heir herein engages in fraudulent, deceptive, or criminal conduct directly related to the title or preservation of this homestead, their residual inheritance rights shall be subject to immediate forfeiture upon formal court order, and the title shall revert in perpetuity to the Canton Community Charitable Trust. I read it 3 times. It required a specific federal or state criminal conviction to trigger. But the moment Ross was convicted of a federal felony involving the property fraud, forgery, elder abuse, this clause would trigger an immediate petition to the Stark County Probate Court to strip his inheritance entirely. No family negotiation, no will contest. Just a judge's signature on a forfeiture order. Nettie's own parents had built a legal trap 37 years ago to protect the homestead from exactly what their grandson was about to do. I printed the certified copy at the reference desk, folded it carefully into my coat pocket, and walked out to the parking lot. Called Alvin from my truck engine running, heat blasting against the December cold. "I've got the third leg of the tripod," I said. He listened while I explained. When I finished, he was quiet for 5 seconds. "Ross is getting ready to slide a fresh piece of paper across a lawyer's desk," he said finally. "You're getting ready to slide his grandfather's will right back at him, a paper his own mother forgot existed." "Exactly." "Good, keep it secured, don't tell anyone." I hung up and sat in the cold truck cab, watching my breath mist in the air. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one the enemy leaves buried in your own backyard. Ross is getting ready to inherit his grandfather's will along with his father's debt, and he doesn't know either document exists. Saturday, early December, Ross made his routine weekend visit. I sat in my worn leather armchair in the living room, eyes closed, breathing slow and rhythmic, faking the kind of senile afternoon rest that comes with age and declining cognitive function. The mini recorder rested inside my flannel shirt pocket, red indicator light humming silently in the dark fabric. From the kitchen, with the door cracked 3 inches, Ross's voice cut through clear and unhurried. "The second the holiday passes, we set the clinical evaluation dates," he said. I could hear Margot's lighter footsteps moving near the sink. "If the 2-panel doctors sign off on the cognitive impairment form, Holt files the guardianship and conservatorship motions in tandem. The guardianship gives us medical custody. The conservatorship hands over the financial accounts. The Stark County probate judge routinely signs them together if the family presents a unified front." "Will the judge interview him directly?" Margot asked. Ross scoffed. "The guy can't even remember what station the evening news is on. He'll execute the case against himself just by talking." I remained absolutely motionless, breathing slow, eyes closed. The digital tape rolled silently in my pocket. In 15 years investigating insurance fraud, I learned this: criminals always document their own crimes because arrogance makes them think no one is listening, and I've been listening with a digital recorder for 30 years. This was the 47th time in my career I'd recorded criminals talking too much when they thought the room was empty. Tuesday morning, December 10th. I was pouring fresh water into my coffee basket when Alvin called. His voice was flat, clinical, matching an auditor delivering a routine balance sheet. "The credit committee approved the transaction," he said. "They want the asset off their books before December 31st to clean up their Q4 debt ratios. They accepted a 38% discount on the remaining principal. The Mac Iron Trust must execute the wire transfer within 5 business days, and the title transfer goes live on December 20th. I set the kettle down slowly. "Which means," Alvin interrupted, "which means on December 20th you aren't just the 65% title owner of that property anymore. You are officially the secured lender for the remaining 35%. You are the bank, and a bank doesn't need a family discussion to execute a foreclosure notice." I looked at my steaming coffee mug, picked it up, took a long, slow sip. The heat burned my tongue sharp and real. "Thanks, Alvin. Don't celebrate yet, old friend. We've still got 15 days left on the clock." I hung up and stood at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, staring out the window at the gray December morning. 15 days. On December 20th, I would stop being the property owner Ross was trying to evict. I would become the bank holding his mortgage, the lender who decided whether he kept making payments or lost everything. Ross thought he was about to inherit a house with an unlocked door and open access. He didn't know the house was now owned by his own father's shadow corporation, and his father was the one who determined when the collectors showed up. He didn't know about the 1987 protective covenant that would strip his inheritance the moment a judge signed a felony conviction. He didn't know about the audio recordings documenting his conspiracy in his own voice. He didn't know I owned 65% of the property he was measuring for renovations. And in 15 days, he wouldn't know I'd become his creditor until the foreclosure notice arrived in certified mail. I took another sip of coffee and started counting down the hours. But Ross wouldn't wait until December 20th to make his mistake. He'd make it 2.5 weeks earlier on tape in front of a corrupt attorney who thought he was smarter than the law. Tuesday, December 3rd. Ross guided me up the narrow staircase into Kingsley Redmond's second-floor office in downtown Canton. The mini recorder hidden in my coat pocket started capturing the moment we stepped through the door. "We're setting up a family trust to protect your medical assets, Dad," Ross said, his hand on my elbow like I needed help walking. I shuffled forward, wearing my worn winter coat, eyes intentionally unfocused, steps slow and uncertain. The recorder sat in my interior breast pocket, red light humming silently against the fabric. 15 years old, still worked perfectly. The office was dim, heavy oak trim lining the walls, yellow desk lamps casting pools of weak light across stacks of legal documents. Kingsley Redmond sat behind a mahogany desk that looked expensive and outdated, at the same time the kind of furniture lawyers buy to project authority they haven't earned. He was 58, going soft around the middle with thinning gray hair combed sideways and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His suit was tailored but cheap. Canton attorney. Small-town corruption dressed in polyester blend confidence. "Mr. Ramsey, please have a seat," Kingsley said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. I sat slowly, letting my coat bunch awkwardly around my shoulders. Kingsley slid a thick stack of documents across the desk, his voice taking on the patronizingly simple tone people use when they think you're mentally declining. "This is a straightforward family trust arrangement. Very simple. We're consolidating your assets to ensure they're protected for medical care and estate planning purposes. All you need to do is verify a few signature lines and we'll have everything secured before the holidays." I nodded slowly, staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Kingsley flipped through the stack, pointing to sections with a gold pen. "Here and here. Standard trust language, beneficiary designations, and this final page is the title transfer authorization." He slid the signature page directly in front of me. I looked down. My name was already printed on the signature line in sophisticated cursive script, a font designed to mimic human handwriting. Smooth, consistent, perfect. It was not my signature. Kingsley was explicitly ordering me to sign a document verifying a signature that had already been forged in my absence. Textbook Class 3, forgery under Ohio law. 3 to 11 years depending on the valuation of the fraud. And he was doing it on tape. In 15 years investigating fraud, I'd seen dozens of schemes, but I'd never seen someone stupid enough to order a man to verify a signature they'd already forged in his name on tape in front of witnesses. I blinked at the paper, then looked up at Kingsley with confusion carefully painted across my face. "Where exactly does the pen go, Mr. Redmond?" I asked slowly, my voice shaking slightly. Kingsley pointed to the line with his gold pen. "Right here, Mr. Ramsey, just your normal signature." I stared at the forged cursive for another 5 seconds. Then I smiled weakly and pushed the papers back across the desk. "Let me sleep on it for a few days first," I said. "Make sure my head is clear. I get confused easily these days." Kingsley's smile vanished. He glared at Ross. Ross nodded quickly, his jaw tight. "Next week then, Dad, right before the holidays. We'll get it all wrapped up." "Sure, son, next week." I stood slowly, letting Ross take my elbow again as we walked out. The recorder kept rolling until we hit the street. Same afternoon, I sat in my pickup truck parked in the library parking lot, engine killed, thin plumes of frosty breath rising in the cold December air. I called Alvin immediately. "He did it," I said. "Pre-printed cursive font, my name already on the signature line. He told me to verify it. Complete audio recording." Alvin was silent for 5 seconds, the calculated pause of an experienced auditor processing implications, not surprise. "This isn't a domestic probate dispute anymore," he said finally, his voice flat. "The primary mortgage note we're purchasing is federally backed under the Fannie Mae Secondary Housing Credit Pool. Executing, filing, or uttering a forged instrument against a Fannie Mae asset elevates the crime automatically to federal bank fraud. I stared through the frosted windshield at the red brick buildings of downtown Canton. Workers were stringing green holiday garlands across the streetlights. "What are the sentencing guidelines?" I asked quietly. Alvin's voice didn't change. 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, no early parole. I let that sit for a moment. 10 to 20 years, federal prison, not state, no chance of reduction. "I need exactly 2 more weeks to let Ross execute the final filing," I said. Alvin hesitated. "Are you sure you want to run the clock that close?" I watched a woman hang a wreath on a storefront door across the street. Christmas was coming. Lights, family dinners, holiday cheer. "A scammer always hangs himself with his own paperwork," I said. "I just have to let him pull the cord." Alvin was quiet for another beat. Then, "Understood. Keep the recorder running. Document everything. Don't sign anything." "I won't." And Lester, "Yeah. The feds require a pristine paper trail. Let him build it. Every document, every meeting, every lie. When this goes federal, they'll want the whole conspiracy mapped out in his own handwriting." I hung up and sat in the cold truck cab watching downtown Canton prepare for Christmas. 14 more days. Ross thought he was finalizing a family trust. What he was actually doing was constructing a federal fraud case with his own signature, his own voice, his own documented conspiracy. And I was going to let him finish. Because the trap was already built. He just didn't know whose hands had set it. Watching someone build their own case is the easy part. The hard part is waiting for the witness who knows what you don't. The person who saw the conspiracy forming in real time and kept a record no one thought existed. The soft, hesitant knocks came at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday evening in mid-December. I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing bank statements when I heard it 3 gentle taps, barely loud enough to register over the hum of the refrigerator. I walked to the front door and opened it. Zelda Castillo stood on my porch mat in the falling snow, yellow porch light casting shadows across her face. She was 64, a retired nurse who'd lived in the house next door for 20 years. Thick green parka, wool scarf, gloves clutching a small red leather pocket journal against her chest like it might blow away in the wind. I recognized her breathing pattern instantly. The same shallow, terrified rhythm I'd heard 3 times on the phone at midnight. "Zelda," I said quietly. She nodded once. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and she walked past me into the warmth of the house, snow melting off her boots onto the entry mat. We sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where I'd read the will, opened the group chat screenshots, reviewed the renovation board. The same table where I'd poured rye whiskey and stared at evidence while my family plotted upstairs. Zelda set the red journal on the table between us. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I've been a nurse for 30 years, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "Keeping an accurate chart is a habit. You don't lose dates, times, medications, statements. You document everything because memory lies, but paper doesn't." I looked at the journal, small, worn, the kind nurses carry in their pockets during 12-hour shifts. "Starting in June," Zelda continued, "Nettie began telling me about a restructuring plan." That's what she called it, restructuring, like you were a failing business instead of her husband. June 2024. 1 month after my heart attack. 1 month after the stent. 1 month after I'd collapsed in the garden with a tomato cage in my hands. By August, attorney Kingsley Redmond's name started appearing in her conversations. She'd mentioned meetings, consultations, legal strategies. She told me you were becoming confused, forgetful, that it was time to protect the estate from poor decisions. Zelda's jaw tightened. By October, she stated flat out that the title papers would be signed and sealed before New Year's Day. She said Ross was handling the financial side, Margot was managing the property assessment, and Kingsley was drafting the guardianship petition. She pushed the journal toward me. 14 entries, she said. June through October. Dates, direct quotes, witness notes. Everything a nurse documents when she knows something is deeply wrong. Nurses don't just keep charts for patients. They keep them for everyone they care about. because documenting the truth is the only way to protect people who can't protect themselves. I opened the journal carefully. The first entry was dated June 18th, 2024. Neat handwriting, clinical precision. June 18th. Nettie mentioned estate transition planning over coffee. Said L is no longer equipped to handle financial decisions on his own. Discussed attorney consultation scheduled for next week. I turned the page. June 25th, Nettie confirmed meeting with attorney K. Redmond. Stated goal is full transfer of decision-making authority before end of year. Another page. August 3rd. Nettie described Ross's involvement. Quote, Ross is finally stepping up to handle what his father can't anymore. Mentioned property appraisal scheduled. Before I show you what those 14 entries revealed, if you're still with me, comment A if you think Nettie acted alone, or B if you think someone pushed her to this, and add one reason in 5 to 10 words. Quick note. The next part includes some fictionalized details to convey the emotional truth. The lesson is what matters. I kept reading. September 12th. Nettie laughed about L, asking the same question 3 times at dinner. Quote, It's almost too easy. He's doing half the work for us. October 7th. Nettie confirmed guardianship petition draft complete. Attorney expects filing mid-December. Quote, By Christmas this will all be settled. October 22nd. Nettie discussed renovation plans with Margot. Showed photos of kitchen demolition. Quote, Once the papers are signed, we can finally turn this place into something worth keeping. I closed the journal slowly and looked at Zelda. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was resolute. You know this means you'll never sit on her porch again, Zelda? I asked quietly. She nodded once, jaw set. I know, she said. But I also know you deserve the truth more than she deserves an audience for her lies. A 20-year friendship doesn't end quietly. It ends when your conscience finally gets louder than your loyalty, and you realize the person sitting across from you deserves the truth more than the liar deserves your silence. I stood, walked to the stove and put the kettle on, poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea, set one in front of Zelda, one in front of myself. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, staring into the steam. I should have called sooner, she said. I should have warned you in June. You called when you were ready, I said. That's what matters. We sat in silence for a long moment. The only sound, the tick of the wall clock and the faint hiss of snow hitting the kitchen window. 14 separate entries. June through October. 5 months of documented conspiracy. Nettie was drafting the terms of my eviction while I was still learning how to take deep breaths with a piece of medical wire holding my artery open, while nurses checked my vitals every 4 hours, while I relearned how to walk upstairs without getting winded. She was sitting in Kingsley Redmond's office planning my legal elimination while I was sitting in a cardiac recovery room wondering if I'd live to see Christmas. I picked up my mug of tea. It had gone cold. I didn't care. I drank it anyway. Reading those 14 entries changed how I saw everything. Not just the conspiracy, the entire marriage, every gesture, every conversation, every morning ritual I'd taken for granted. The morning kiss came at the same time it had for 42 years. Thursday, December 12th. The day after Zelda's diary delivery, I sat at the kitchen table with the sports section spread in front of me, coffee cooling in my mug, the winter sun slanting through the window casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Nettie returned from her grocery run and set brown paper bags on the counter. The rustle of plastic, the soft thud of canned goods being arranged, the familiar rhythm of a routine we'd performed thousands of times. She walked over and pressed a soft kiss to the crown of my head, a gesture she'd performed every single morning across 42 years of marriage. You doing all right, sweetie? She asked, her voice light and concerned. You look a bit drained today. I looked up into her eyes. I'm fine, Nettie, I said. Just thinking about the year we bought this place. Her hands paused over the grocery bags for a fraction of a second. She studied my face, and it wasn't an expression of concern. It was the cold, calculating look of an insurance adjuster assessing a liability claim. The same look I'd seen countless times in fraud investigations when someone was measuring risk versus reward. Then the warm smile returned, practiced and automatic. "Don't wear your brain out, Lester," she said, returning to the groceries. "Ross and I have taken care of everything for you." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, you and Ross take care of everything." She hummed softly, putting milk in the refrigerator, bread in the basket, vegetables in the crisper drawer. I turned back to the sports section. Beneath the newspaper page, my pen added a single line to the small notebook I kept in my shirt pocket. December 12th morning. A kiss on the head. The calculator look behind the eyes. 42 years I mistook that look for devotion. 42 years of marriage, 15,000 mornings of coffee and kisses and small talk, and I'd spent every single one of them misreading the expression in her eyes, mistaking calculation for devotion. But I hadn't just been collecting emotional evidence. 2 days earlier, Tuesday, December 10th, I'd returned to Kingsley Redmond's office for the scheduled follow-up visit 1 week after the first meeting, exactly as Ross had arranged. Kingsley had streamlined the process this time, skipping all legal descriptions and explanatory language. "The old man doesn't need to get bogged down in the paragraphs, Ross," he said, his voice casual and dismissive. "Just have him ink the line." Ross stepped forward, placing a heavy, firm hand on my shoulder. Not the gentle support of a son helping his father, but the controlled grip of a guard managing a prisoner. The mini recorder in my coat pocket captured every word, every movement, every breath in that dim office with its yellow lamps and oak trim. Kingsley slid the gold pen into my hand. "Right here, Mr. Ramsey," he said, tapping the signature line with his finger. "Just your normal signature." I looked down at the document. Title transfer authorization. Legal language transferring ownership interest from my name to a family trust controlled by Ross and Nettie. I took the pen, and I signed a completely incorrect name. Not a sloppy version of my signature, not a shaky approximation. A deliberately altered name, different cursive flow, different spelling, different pressure points, designed to fail any legal comparison with my actual signature on the refinancing deeds or the promissory note. Kingsley and Ross didn't even inspect the line. They simply pulled the paper back, eager to secure the senile old man's signature and move forward with the next phase of their plan. Kingsley hooked his briefcase shut with a satisfied click, extending his hand to Ross. "Step 1 is locked down," he said. Ross shook his hand, grinning. "Appreciate you handling this, Kingsley. Makes everything smoother." I looked down at my thumb, black ink stain from the gold pen. The recorder in my pocket had captured everything, including Kingsley's explicit instruction, "Just have him ink it, he doesn't know what day it is anyway." Criminals always make the same mistake. They assume incompetence means blindness, and they never check the signature they're so eager to file, which is exactly why an investigator learns to write his own name wrong. The forged document was now an absolute ironclad instrument of federal bank fraud, because the signature they'd just witnessed wasn't mine. Which meant when they filed that document with the county recorder's office claiming it bore my valid signature, they would be uttering a forged instrument against federally backed collateral. And I had audio proof of Kingsley ordering the fraud, and Ross's hand on my shoulder guiding me like livestock, and the entire conspiracy documented in their own voices on their own timeline with their own admissions of intent. I'd spent 15 years investigating fraud rings. I knew exactly how to build a case that couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be plea bargained down to a misdemeanor, couldn't be blamed on miscommunication or honest mistakes. You document everything. You let them commit the crime completely. You never interrupt a criminal who's building his own prison cell. That night back at my apartment, I added the Tuesday visit to my case ledger. December 10th, 2:30 p.m., Kingsley Redmond's office. Witnessed execution of fraudulent title transfer, deliberately invalidated signature, full audio capture of conspiracy coordination, federal bank fraud complete and documented. I closed the ledger and sat in the darkness listening to the radiator tick and hiss. Kingsley had slid that deed into his briefcase entirely unaware that the signature on that line was legally invalid because I'd chosen to write it wrong. Entirely unaware that his own voice saying he doesn't know what day it is anyway was currently logged on a digital recorder I'd been using for 15 years. An investigator never truly leaves the field. You just learn to investigate from the inside. The trap was set, both of them actually. Mine and theirs. The only question left was whose would spring first. You ever watch someone set a trap for you and realize you're setting the exact same one for them? Mid-December Sunday dinner. Nettie stood at the head of the table and tapped her wine glass with a fork, calling for attention with performative cheer that would have fooled anyone who hadn't spent the last 6 months watching her construct a conspiracy. "I have wonderful news," she announced, her smile bright and warm. "This year we're hosting Christmas at the homestead, a real celebration, extended family, neighbors, church friends. I've already sent out invitations. We're expecting at least 20 people." Ross leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking at me across the table. Margot touched his shoulder, her expression carefully neutral. I nodded slowly, playing the role they expected. "That sounds lovely, Nettie," I said. "Real family Christmas." "Exactly," she said, sitting back down. "It's important to have witnesses. It's important to have loved ones around during the holidays." Witnesses. She'd almost said it out loud, because that's what this was. A stage. A public performance designed to pressure me into compliance, to sign whatever documents they'd prepared to surrender in front of an audience who would all testify that I'd done it willingly, surrounded by family and good spirits on Christmas Day. I took a sip of water and caught Ross's eyes. He thought he was watching an old man cave to family pressure. What he was actually watching was an investigator recognizing the exact play he'd been anticipating for weeks. 2 chess players, both with their hands hovering over the same square. The difference was I knew which pieces he had left on the board. He had no idea I'd already captured his king. December 21st evening, cold and clear, stars bright overhead. Milo showed up at my apartment door with a cardboard box of Christmas lights tangled and knotted from a year in storage. "Grandma says we need to hang these in the tool shed," he said, "for the party." I looked at the 9-year-old standing in my doorway, backpack on his shoulders, winter coat 3 sizes too big. "All right, kiddo," I said. "Let's get them untangled." We drove to the homestead together, my old truck rattling over the icy roads, Milo sitting beside me in the passenger seat, swinging his legs and humming a tune I didn't recognize. In the tool shed, I stood on a stepladder stringing lights along the rafters while Milo handed me sections of cord, his small hands careful and deliberate. "Grandpa," he asked quietly. I looked down. "Yeah. Are you going to be happy after Christmas?" I paused, light strand in hand, and looked at his face. Serious. Worried. The same expression he'd worn when he asked if the house was mine or his father's. I climbed down from the ladder, knelt in front of him so we were eye to eye, and put my hands on his shoulders. "After this Christmas," I said, "everything is going to be clear for both of us. I promise." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, Grandpa." We finished hanging the lights in silence, the tool shed glowing warm and golden when we flipped the switch. Milo smiled for the first time all evening. "It looks good," he said. "Yeah," I said, "it does." Christmas Eve. Midnight. I sat alone at my apartment desk, the single brass lamp casting a pool of yellow light across the scarred wooden surface. 3 folders laid out in front of me, color-coded, organized with the precision I'd learned over 15 years building cases that held up in federal court. Blue folder. Financial crimes. The refinance documents showing my 65% ownership. The LLC mortgage note purchase confirmation dated December 20th, finalized 4 days ago, making me Ross's secured creditor. The forged signature on the title transfer deliberately invalidated. The audio recording of Kingsley ordering me to just ink the line. The group chat screenshots calling me a breathing wallet. Red folder, elder abuse. Zelda's red diary with 14 dated entries from June through October. The audio recording of Ross detailing the guardianship and conservatorship strategy. Nettie's will excluding me as amply provided for. The May heart attack timeline showing the conspiracy began 1 month after I nearly died. Yellow folder custody concern. Photographs of Milo's worried face. Documentation of Ross's unemployment versus the differential oil stain proving illegal income. The 1987 protective covenant that would strip Ross's inheritance upon criminal conviction. Notes on Milo's questions about who owned the house, about whether Grandpa would be happy. 3 folders, 3 weapons, 1 Christmas. Each folder contained original documents, plus complete backup copies stored in a safety deposit box at a bank branch 40 miles outside Canton where no one in my family would think to look. This wasn't just evidence. It was 3 separate legal pathways. Blue would trigger federal bank fraud prosecution. 10 to 20 years, no parole. Red would support an elder abuse protective order and immediate separation. Yellow would initiate a custody evaluation to protect Milo from the fallout. I wasn't filing a single complaint. I was deploying a comprehensive takedown designed to ensure that no matter which direction they ran, no matter which attorney they hired, no matter how they tried to spin the narrative, the evidence would be waiting. I closed the folders and stacked them carefully in my leather briefcase. Tomorrow morning, Christmas Day, I would drive to the homestead with these 3 folders in my truck. Nettie would gather her witnesses, cousins, neighbors, church members, and stage her performance. Ross would produce whatever documents they'd prepared for me to sign. And I would produce 3 color-coded folders that would end their conspiracy in front of everyone they'd invited to watch me surrender. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting from the homestead kitchen. By 10 o'clock in the morning, 17 people filled the house. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors from down the road. Old family friends who'd known us since we bought the place. Nettie's stage was set. So was mine. By evening, the count had grown to 23. More cousins, more neighbors, more witnesses to whatever was about to happen in this house. The briefcase under my coat weighed 11 pounds, 3 folders, 2 backup drives, 1 future. Christmas Day, 5 o'clock in the evening. The homestead living room and dining room overflowed with guests. Laughter echoed off the walls. Holiday music drifted from the old stereo in the corner, Bing Crosby singing about white Christmases and sleigh bells. The scent of roasted ham and cinnamon filled the air, mixing with pine from the tree and candle wax from the centerpieces Nettie had arranged with such careful precision. I stood in the hallway for a moment, briefcase in hand, and watched the scene through the doorway. 23 people. Extended family I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors from down the road. Church members Nettie had cultivated over decades. All of them gathered in the house on Christmas evening, glasses of wine in hand, plates of food balanced on laps, smiling and talking like this was just another holiday celebration. They had no idea what they were about to witness. I slipped the briefcase under my coat in the hall closet, tucking it behind winter jackets where it would stay hidden until I needed it. Then I walked into the living room. Alvin Spencer sat quietly in the corner armchair near the fireplace, a glass of water in his hand, his expression calm and unreadable. He'd arrived an hour earlier, introduced himself to Nettie as an old friend from my shop days, and settled into his position like a man who knew exactly where he needed to be. Zelda Castillo stood near the kitchen exit, talking softly with one of Nettie's church friends, her eyes occasionally flicking toward me with the careful attention of someone who knew what was coming. Nettie glowed. That's the only word for it. She moved through the crowd with hostess radiance, refilling drinks, accepting compliments on the decorations, touching shoulders, and laughing at jokes. She believed this crowd would witness my surrender, my capitulation, my signing of whatever documents Ross had prepared. She thought she was orchestrating my public defeat. What she'd actually done was assemble my jury. 23 witnesses. Nettie assembled for his humiliation are the exact same 23 who will validate his evidence. She built his courtroom for him. So wonderful to have everyone together, Nettie announced, her voice carrying over the music. This Christmas is extra special. Alvin caught my eye across the room and murmured quietly, just loud enough for me to hear, "Nice turnout." I nodded slightly. 23 pairs of eyes. She chose the number. I'm just grateful for it. Dinner service began at 5:30. Carved ham, scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, warm rolls with butter, cranberry sauce in a crystal bowl. Nettie orchestrated the meal with theatrical precision, directing traffic between the kitchen and dining room, ensuring everyone had full plates and full glasses. Ross moved through the crowd, refilling wine, his movements confident and proprietary. He paused at my chair, bottle in hand, and smirked down at me. "Dad, you're awfully quiet tonight," he said. "Everything okay?" I looked up at my son. "Just grateful to be here, son," I said. "Very grateful." He patted my shoulder, the same controlling grip he'd used in Kingsley's office, and moved on. Margot watched both of us carefully from across the table, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. Nettie settled into her seat at the opposite end of the table from me, where I used to sit for 42 years, and raised her glass. "Lester's always been a man of few words," she said with performative warmth. "But we love him anyway." Polite laughter rippled through the room. I ate slowly, counting witnesses, noting exits, checking my watch. 6:15. What's the difference between a witness and an accomplice? Sometimes just the angle they're watching from. Dessert plates were cleared by 6:20. Pumpkin pie, whipped cream, coffee in china cups that Nettie only brought out for special occasions. Then Nettie stood. She tapped her wine glass with a fork, the clear ring of metal on crystal cutting through the conversation. The room quieted. Faces turned toward her. The music seemed to fade into background noise. She smiled at the 23 faces around the table, then looked directly at me. This was her planned moment. The stage she'd built, the performance she'd rehearsed. My hand moved slowly toward the inside pocket of my coat, where a USB drive waited, a backup copy of every audio recording, every screenshot, every piece of evidence in those 3 folders. 2 people, 1 stage, opposite scripts. Her stage, my evidence, same room. "I'd like to say a few words," Nettie began, her voice steady and warm, "about family, loyalty, and truth." I almost smiled, because those were the exact 3 words I'd planned to open with. Family, loyalty, truth. She was about to talk about how family takes care of its elders, how loyalty means accepting help when you need it, how truth requires acknowledging when you can no longer handle things on your own. I was about to talk about how family doesn't forge signatures, how loyalty doesn't include conspiracy, how truth is measured in audio recordings and notarized documents. Same speech, opposite meanings. Nettie's wine glass caught the candlelight held high like a verdict waiting to be delivered. 23 faces turned toward her, expectant and attentive. Ross leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, confidence radiating from every line of his posture. Margot's hand rested on his shoulder, and across the room, through the crowd of cousins and neighbors and church members who had no idea what they were about to witness, Alvin's eyes found mine. He gave the smallest nod. "Ready. So would I, Nettie." So would I. But Nettie didn't speak first. Ross did. He stood before she could say another word, fork against crystal, 3 sharp taps that cut through the room like a gavel calling court to order. The conversation stopped. The music faded into background noise. 23 faces turned from Nettie to Ross. He smiled, warm and concerned, the expression of a devoted son about to do something difficult but necessary. "Before Mom continues," Ross said, his voice carrying across the room with practiced ease, "I need to address something that's been weighing on our family. Dad's been struggling lately. Memory lapses, confusion about finances. We've had some difficult conversations, and we think it's time for some professional oversight." The room went still. I sat perfectly motionless, watching my son perform. "It's not easy to talk about," Ross continued, his tone perfectly calibrated between concern and confidence. "But we love Dad too much to let him make decisions that could hurt him. Starting January 1st, I'll be assuming full administrative management of the estate to ensure everything is handled properly. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a bound legal document, cream-colored paper, professional binding, the kind of thing Kingsley Redmond would print on expensive letterhead. He slid it across the table toward me. "Sign this tonight, Dad," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Right here, in front of everyone who loves you." The room held its breath. There it is. Elder abuse scripted and performed for an audience. Ross's speech used the exact clinical language from elder abuse legal templates, the same phrases Alvin had shown me weeks ago as reference for what abusers typically say. Difficult conversations, professional oversight, decisions that could hurt him. Textbook manipulation delivered with a smile. You ever watch someone perform a script they don't know you've already read? I looked at the document on the table, didn't touch it, didn't move. Then I stood. Silence. My posture was straight, my eyes were clear, my hands didn't tremble. I walked to the hall closet, opened the door, and retrieved my briefcase from beneath the winter coats where I'd hidden it hours earlier. Returned to the dining room. 23 pairs of eyes tracked my movement. I set the briefcase on the table, opened the latches with 2 sharp clicks, and extracted 3 color-coded folders. Blue, red, yellow. Laid them on the table like evidence exhibits in a courtroom, which is exactly what they were. "I want the exact same thing you do, son," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Witnesses." Ross's confident expression flickered. "Dad, what are you—" "Everyone at this table is about to see something," I said, "including you." Nettie's wine glass hit the table with a sharp clink. Margot's hand tightened on Ross's shoulder. Alvin remained perfectly still in the corner, his expression unreadable. Zelda stood near the kitchen exit watching. I picked up the blue folder. "Uncle Gerald," I said, looking 3 chairs down the table at my younger brother. Gerald Ramsey was 71, retired after 30 years as a Stark County auditor. The family's quiet accountant who never missed a decimal, never raised his voice, never took sides in family disputes. He'd come to Christmas dinner the way he came every year, polite, reserved, expecting nothing more dramatic than pie and coffee. He looked up at me now, his expression cautious. "You spent 30 years auditing county records," I said. "Tell everyone what you see." I slid the blue folder across the table. Gerald hesitated for a moment, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his reading glasses, the same wire-rimmed pair he'd worn for decades. Put them on. Opened the folder. His expression shifted from curiosity to shock in the space of 3 seconds. He lifted the first page carefully as if it might burn his fingers. "Lester," he said quietly, his voice stunned. This is a forensic financial analysis." "That's correct," I said. "This is inappropriate," Nettie said, her voice tight and sharp. "It's Christmas." I didn't look at her, kept my eyes on Gerald. "Keep reading," I said. Gerald turned to the 2nd page, then the 3rd. His hands moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent a career reviewing documents that sent people to prison. 3 folders, 3 verdicts, 1 room full of witnesses. "What you're looking at," I said, addressing the room now, "is documentation of a conspiracy that began in June of this year, 1 month after I had a heart attack and nearly died in the backyard garden." Ross stood abruptly. "Dad, this is—" "Sit down," I said. He sat. Gerald pulled out a document labeled in bold print, Notarized Signature Comparison Analysis. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted it into the light. 2 signatures side by side, both supposedly mine. One was my actual signature, the one on the refinancing documents from 8 years ago, the one that appeared on the deed showing my 65% ownership. The other was a pre-printed cursive font designed to look like handwriting but created by a computer program. The signature Ross and Kingsley Redmond had forged onto the title transfer documents they'd tried to get me to validate. Gerald stared at both signatures for a long moment. Then he looked up at Ross, then at me. "One of these is real," Gerald said quietly. "One of these is forged." Ross's face drained of color. Nettie's breathing went shallow. Margot removed her hand from Ross's shoulder and took a step back. Gerald turned to the next page, the LLC formation document showing the Mac Iron Trust's purchase of the mortgage note on December 20th. The documents that made me Ross's secured creditor. the documents that meant I wasn't just a property owner anymore. I was the bank, and the bank was about to foreclose. Gerald cleared his throat, adjusted his wire-rimmed reading glasses, and began to read aloud. His voice, calm, clinical, devastating, filled the silent room like a coroner's report. Subject Lester Eugene Ramsey. Property analysis 3-acre residential homestead, Canton, Stark County, Ohio. Gerald's finger traced down the page. Subject Lester Ramsey retains 65% ownership interest as primary title holder. LLC entity Mac Iron Trust Holdings owns the first mortgage note as secured creditor. Conclusion: subject is creditor, not debtor. The room was silent except for Gerald's voice and the faint hiss of candles burning low on the table. What that means, I said, my voice steady, is that I don't just own this house. I am your bank, Ross. You've been paying me rent every month without knowing it. Nettie's wine glass trembled in her hand. I picked up the blue folder and held it up for the room to see. Blue folder, I said. Ownership proof. Refinancing documents from 8 years ago showing my 65% majority stake. LLC formation documents dated December 20th, 5 days ago, transferring the mortgage note into my control. Every page certified, notarized, recorded with the county. I set it down and picked up the red folder. Red folder. Audio recordings of my son and his attorney discussing guardianship petitions and forged signatures. Witness testimony from a neighbor who documented 14 separate conversations about this conspiracy starting in June, 1 month after I nearly died from a heart attack. Gerald was still reading the blue folder documents, his auditor's eyes moving line by line, checking dates and signatures the way he'd done for 30 years. Every document here is certified, Gerald said quietly. Notarized, legally recorded. I picked up the yellow folder. Yellow folder. A protective covenant written by Nettie's own parents in 1987 that automatically strips inheritance rights from any heir convicted of fraud against this property. A promissory note showing Ross owes me $200,000 in fraudulent transfers. And a federal wire fraud warrant reference number because forging signatures on federally backed mortgage documents isn't a state crime, Ross. It's federal bank fraud. The LLC structure means Lester doesn't just own the property, he holds the mortgage, making him Ross and Nettie's literal creditor. They've been paying rent to the man they tried to evict. I set all 3 folders on the table. Blue folder means I own this house, I said. Red folder proves you forged my name. Yellow folder shows you owe me $200,000 and the FBI knows it. Nettie whispered, her voice barely audible. You planned this. I documented it, I said. You planned it. I just kept the receipts. Watching a Jenga tower collapse in slow motion, each document, another block pulled free. Ross slammed both hands on the table. Plates jumped. Wine glasses rattled. Candles flickered. This is a setup, he shouted, his face red veins standing out on his neck. You manipulated everything you... Alvin Spencer stood. The movement was quiet, controlled, but it cut through Ross's shouting like a knife. Every eye in the room turned to the man who'd been sitting silently in the corner armchair for the last 2 hours. Alvin Spencer, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. Retired IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I've been coordinating with the FBI Cleveland Field Office for 14 days. They have copies of every document in those 3 folders. They have audio recordings, they have witness statements, and they have jurisdiction over federal bank fraud cases involving Fannie Mae-backed mortgages. Alvin Spencer isn't just a friend, he's a retired IRS criminal investigator who's been running a federal coordination with the FBI for 2 weeks while sitting in Lester's living room. Ross stared at Alvin like he was seeing a ghost. Nettie's face had gone pale. And Margot went perfectly still. She looked at Ross, then at the 3 folders on the table, then at Alvin, then at me. No one moved. Then, without saying a single word, Margot reached down and pulled the engagement ring off her left hand. A small diamond, modest and tasteful, the kind Ross could afford on his non-existent income. She set it on the table between a plate of gingerbread cookies. and the forensic financial analysis that was about to send her fiancé to federal prison. The ring made a soft click against the wood. Margot stood, grabbed her coat from the back of her chair, and walked toward the front door. Her heels clicked across the hardwood floor. The door opened. Cold December air rushed into the warm room, carrying the smell of snow and pine. The door closed. Click. Gone. A diamond ring, a federal case, a silent exit. Ross stared at the empty doorway where Margot had just disappeared. Then he looked down at the ring on the table. Then he looked at his mother. Nettie's performative tears had vanished. The warm hostess smile, the concerned wife routine, all of it gone in the space of 10 seconds. Her face was blank, cold. The expression of someone doing rapid calculations, assessing damage, weighing options, planning the next move. The real Nettie. The one I'd finally learned to recognize behind the calculator's eyes. 23 witnesses, I said quietly. You invited them, Nettie. You set this stage. You just didn't know what play I was going to perform. The room was silent except for the soft crackle of candles and someone's nervous breathing. Gerald closed the blue folder carefully and set it back on the table. Zelda stood near the kitchen, her hand covering her mouth. The 23 guests, cousins, neighbors, church members, sat frozen in their chairs, coffee cups halfway to their lips, dessert forks suspended in midair, watching a family implode on Christmas evening. Margot's diamond caught the candlelight one last time, sitting between Christmas cookies and federal fraud documentation. The front door stayed closed. Ross stared at the empty doorway, then at the ring, then at his mother, whose face had gone from tears to stone-cold calculation in under 10 seconds. And I thought, this is what truth looks like when it finally stops hiding. The knock comes at 8:15 p.m., 3 sharp raps that silence every conversation mid-sentence. 23 people freeze. Aunt Phyllis's fork hovers over pumpkin pie. Uncle Gerald closes his laptop mid-email. Ross stands so fast his chair scrapes oak flooring. Through the frosted glass panels flanking my front door, I count 4 silhouettes. Canton PD uniforms. 2 plainclothes shapes behind them. I'll get it, I say. Nettie's hand shoots across the table. Lester, wait. It's my house. I walk to the door. I invited them. The lead FBI agent shows credentials through the glass before I turn the deadbolt. Special Agent Morris Hayes. Tall, late 30s, wire-rimmed glasses catching porch light. Behind him, Special Agent Rebecca Foster holds a tablet. 2 Canton officers flank the steps. Mr. Ramsey, Agent Hayes says, we have a federal warrant for the arrest of Ross Patrick Ramsey. Is he present? Dining room, I step aside. Third person from the left. Ross bolts for the kitchen. Agent Foster moves faster. She's at the back door before he clears the hallway. The Canton officers bracket him from both sides. He freezes between refrigerator and pantry hands, rising slowly. Ross Michael Ramsey, you're under arrest for wire fraud conspiracy to commit bank fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs click shut at 8:17 p.m. Ross stares at me over Agent Foster's shoulder, face drained white. Nettie's standing now, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other gripping the table edge. I cross the dining room, lean close to Ross's ear as Agent Hayes finishes Miranda warnings. You have the right to remain silent, I whisper. I strongly suggest you use it tonight. His eyes go wider. Agent Foster guides him toward the door. Wait! Nettie rushes forward. This is a mistake. Ross would never... Ma'am? Agent Hayes' voice stays level. Kingsley Redmond was arrested on December 23rd. He provided a full cooperating statement implicating your son in exchange for a reduced charge recommendation. That statement gave us the federal warrant we executed tonight. Fannie Mae and illegally obtained property through forged mortgage documents. Mr. Ramsey Jr. withdrew $47,000 cash from 3 separate accounts between December 20th and 23rd. Flight risk assessment supports immediate detention. The room tilts. How long does it take for a life to collapse? 42 years of marriage, 38 years of parenthood, 96. consecutive mortgage payments all reduced to Miranda rights and federal booking procedures. Agent Foster pauses at the threshold. Mr. Ramsey will need you available for testimony. Preliminary hearing is scheduled for January 6th. I'll be there, I say. The door closes. Through frosted glass, I watch them load Ross into the back seat. Red and blue lights paint my Christmas tree. Aunt Phyllis starts crying. Cousin Rebecca hugs her. Uncle Gerald stands beside me, hand on my shoulder. You did what you had to do, he says quietly. Maybe, but doing the right thing doesn't always feel righteous. The next 90 minutes blur guests collecting coats, offering tight-lipped condolences, avoiding eye contact with Nettie. By 9:45 p.m., the house empties. Gerald's the last to leave, pausing on the porch. Call if you need anything, he says. Anything at all. I nod, close the door, turn the deadbolt. Nettie sits at the dining table exactly where Ross sat 4 hours ago. Margot's engagement ring still rests between cookies and fraud documentation. Nettie's staring at it like it might explain something, how we arrived here, how Christmas became a federal crime scene, how her children chose differently. I fill the electric kettle, pull 2 ceramic mugs from the cabinet, navy blue with white anchors, wedding gifts from 1982. The chamomile tea bags steep while I stand at the counter watching steam curl upward in the kitchen silence. At 10 p.m. I carry both mugs to the table, set one in front of Nettie, sit across from her, the chair still warm from where Gerald sat. 42 years, 15,300 days. This is what remains: 2 mugs of tea and a 3-carat diamond that doesn't belong to us. Nettie wraps both hands around her mug, doesn't drink, doesn't look up. Can you forgive me? She whispers. I think about that for a long time. Think about Zelda's red diary, 14 entries documenting conspiracy. Think about Milo sleeping upstairs in Spider-Man pajamas while his father rides to federal detention. Think about Margot walking out the door, taking her integrity with her. No, I say finally. I can't. Her hands shake. Tea sloshes against ceramic. But I can offer you a deal, I continue. Gerald's drafting a co-ownership agreement. You sign, you stay protected. The house stays jointly owned. You get fair equity when we sell or when one of us dies. You're not homeless, not destitute. And what do you get? Her voice cracks. Separate bedrooms, I say. Separate finances. You're a co-owner and a housemate, nothing more. We've been married 42 years. I know. I lift my mug. The chamomile tastes like ash. That's why you're getting this offer instead of eviction papers. It's more than you gave me. She finally looks up. Mascara streaks frame red-rimmed eyes. For a moment, I see the woman I married in 1982, 24 years old, laughing at my terrible dance moves, promising forever. But forever ended somewhere between May and December, between heart attacks and forged signatures, between choosing me and choosing Ross. I'll sign, she says. Whatever you want. Good. I stand, rinse my mug in the sink. Gerald will email the documents tomorrow. Read them carefully. Get your own attorney if you want. Lester, I'm going to bed, I say. Lock up when you're done. I climb the stairs slowly. My chest aches. Not heart attack pain, something deeper. At the landing, I pause outside Milo's room. The door's cracked open. I can see his small shape under dinosaur blankets, one arm flung over his head, breathing steady and peaceful. He doesn't know yet. Doesn't know his father's in federal custody, his grandmother's complicit, his family fractured beyond repair. Tomorrow I'll have to find words to explain the unexplainable. Tonight I let him sleep. 2 mugs of chamomile tea steam between them in the silent kitchen. 42 years reduced to contract terms and separate bedrooms. Nettie's hand trembles as she lifts her mug. Lester watches the steam rise, thinking about Milo sleeping upstairs, unaware his father just left in federal custody. New Year's Day begins in a conference room in Akron, not with champagne, but with contract law. The week between Christmas and New Year's dissolves into logistics. Nettie moves her belongings to the second-floor guest room. I claim the master bedroom, and we orbit each other like distant planets in a house that used to be a home. We don't speak except to coordinate bathroom schedules and thermostat settings. The chamomile tea went cold that night. We haven't made more. January 1st arrives, cold and clear. At 10 a.m., I sit across from Nettie at a mahogany conference table in Margaret Holloway's law office. The attorney is mid-50s, gray-streaked auburn hair, pulled tight reading glasses perched on her nose. She smells like expensive perfume and leather-bound books. Alvin Spencer sits to my right, a leather portfolio open in front of him, fountain pen resting on yellow legal paper. Margaret slides 3 stapled documents across the polished wood. The paper whispers against mahogany. Outside, snow begins to fall, the first of the new year. 3 doors, Mrs. Ramsey, Margaret says. Co-ownership with restrictions, buyout at appraised value, or civil litigation. Your choice. Nettie's hands rest flat on the table. No wedding ring anymore. She stopped wearing it December 26th. Her fingers look naked. Door 1. Margaret continues tapping the first document, establishes a co-ownership covenant. Joint ownership with equal equity stake. Neither party may sell, lease, or encumber the property without written consent from the other. Living arrangements remain separate. Costs split 50-50. The covenant remains binding until mutual sale agreement, death, or court-ordered dissolution. Nettie stares at the paper like it's written in a foreign language. Door 2. Margaret moves to the second document. Mr. Ramsey buys out your equity stake at current appraised value $142,000 based on the December assessment. You vacate within 90 days. Clean break. Nettie's jaw tightens. Door 3. Margaret's voice stays level, professional. Civil litigation. You contest the co-ownership claim. We go to court. Discovery, depositions, trial, 18 months minimum. Legal fees $75,000 to $150,000, no guaranteed outcome. The conference room falls silent. I can hear the heating vent hissing warm air, the muffled sound of traffic 3 floors below Nettie's shallow breathing. Alvin clicks his pen. Once, twice, waiting. Nettie looks at me finally. Her eyes are red-rimmed. She's been crying, though not in front of me. Which one do you want me to choose? I'm not choosing for you, I say. That's the point. She looks back at the documents. 60 seconds pass, then 90. Margaret sips water from a crystal glass, doesn't rush her. Door 1, Nettie whispers finally. The covenant. Margaret pulls the document forward, flips to the signature page. You'll each sign here, here, and initial here. I'll notarize. She hands Nettie a black ballpoint pen. Nettie signs slowly, her signature shaky but legible. Nettie Marie Ramsey. 3 places. Her hand trembles on the last initial. Then Margaret slides the document to me. I pick up the pen. Feel the weight of it, cheap plastic, not like the forged, pre-printed cursive that Kingsley Redmond used to steal my signature. This is real ink, real hand, real choice. I sign my own name, Lester James Ramsey. Clear, deliberate, genuine. No forgery. No fraud, no theft, just a man reclaiming what was always his agency identity, the right to put his own name on his own life. Margaret notarizes both signatures with a heavy embosser. The seal punches through paper with a satisfying thunk. Done. We stand, shake hands. Nettie leaves first, disappearing into the January cold without looking back. Alvin packs his portfolio, pats my shoulder once. You did the right thing, he says. Maybe. Legal resolution is the opposite of revenge, the cousin of relief. It doesn't heal. It just stops the bleeding. I drive back to Canton alone, listening to classic rock on low volume, watching snowflakes melt against my windshield. By the time I reach my apartment, it's past noon. I make coffee, cheap, instant, tastes like cardboard, and sit by the window overlooking the parking lot. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in late June, Alvin calls while I'm reading the Canton Repository with my second cup of coffee. Sentencing came through, he says without preamble. Thought you'd want to know. I set down the newspaper. Kingsley Redmond got 8 to 15 combined, Alvin continues. State forgery charges plus federal wire fraud. Judge wasn't sympathetic, said he exploited a position of trust for personal gain. And Ross, 10 to 20 federal, bank fraud, conspiracy, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Must serve at least 85% under federal sentencing guidelines before any release consideration. The Fannie Mae angle made it worse. They don't mess around with mortgage fraud. 10 to 20 years. My son will be 58 at minimum when he walks free. Milo will be 29, an entire childhood gone. Margot, I ask, though I already know. Clean, Alvin says. No charges. Her name appeared nowhere on the documents, no signature trail, no paper connection. She was smart enough to stay invisible. There it is. Margot Whitaker, who sat at my Christmas table, who played with Milo under twinkling lights, who seemed so deeply involved, walks away untouched because she never put pen to paper. Her strategic distance wasn't love or loyalty. It was self-preservation. Lester, Alvin's voice pulls me back. You still there? Yeah. I watch a crow land on the parking lot fence, black feathers against dirty snow. I'm here. How you holding up? I think about that. Justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like Tuesday morning with cold coffee and gray clouds. It feels like reading sentencing updates alone in a one-bedroom apartment while your son sits in federal detention and your wife arranges furniture in separate rooms of a shared house. I'm fine, I say. Thanks for calling. We hang up. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, stare at the gray January sky through my apartment window. The coffee's gone cold. The newspaper sits unfinished. The radiator clanks and hisses, fighting against winter. Somewhere Ross sits in a federal holding facility waiting for transfer to whatever prison will hold him for the next decade. Somewhere Nettie moves through rooms we used to share, ghost of a marriage haunting hallways. Somewhere Margot lives her unblemished life, free and clear and untouchable. And somewhere a 9-year-old boy waits for clarity I promised him under Christmas lights. That promise is the only debt left unpaid. Zelda hands me the red diary across her porch table, its cover worn from 42 years of witness. I pay that debt on January 15th. The one to Milo will take longer. Zelda's front porch catches afternoon sun despite the cold winter light slanting through bare oak branches, making shadows dance across weathered wood. She set out 2 mugs of chamomile tea and a plate of shortbread cookies. The tea steams in the freezing air, condensation beading on ceramic. Thought you might want this back, she says, sliding the diary toward me. I touch the leather cover. 14 entries. June through October. Every conversation, every suspicion, every moment Nettie confided in her oldest friend while planning to rob her husband blind. Keep it, I say. Evidence stays with the court. I don't need reminders. Neither do I. Zelda wraps both hands around her mug. She's 64 but looks older today. Lines deeper around her eyes, shoulders curved inward. She came by yesterday. Nettie. I wait. Asked if we could move past this, Zelda continues. Her voice carries quotes around the phrase like barbed wire. Said she made mistakes, but family is family and neighbors should support each other. What did you tell her? I told her I know the difference between wanting to heal and wanting an alibi. Zelda meets my eyes. She'll figure out which one she actually needs. There it is. 40 years of friendship reduced to one sentence of devastating clarity. Zelda didn't just hand me evidence, she chose truth over comfort, justice over loyalty, a stranger's dignity over a friend's convenience. I pick up my tea. It tastes like honey and regret. You sacrificed a lot for me. I sacrificed a comfortable lie for an uncomfortable truth, she says. That's different. We sit in silence for a while. A cardinal lands on her porch railing, bright red against gray January wood, then flies away. Somewhere down the block a dog barks. A car door slams. Normal neighborhood sounds the kind I stopped hearing somewhere between May and December. She asked me once, you know, Zelda says quietly, back in July. Asked how I could stand living next to you. next to me, said you were difficult, controlling, that you monitored her spending, questioned her decisions, made her feel small. Zelda shakes her head. I told her I'd lived next door for 16 years and never once saw the man she was describing. I saw someone who shoveled my driveway without asking. Someone who fixed my porch light at midnight when it shorted out. Someone who brought me soup when I had pneumonia. My throat tightens. I asked her how she could live with you for 42 years and not see what the whole neighborhood saw clearly, Zelda continues. She didn't have an answer. The tea cools between us. The shortbread sits untouched. Winter sun slides lower, painting her porch gold and amber. How do you thank someone who sacrificed a 4-decade friendship to hand you evidence in a red leather diary? What words cover that debt? Thank you, I say finally. Inadequate, insufficient, true. Zelda nods. You going to be okay, Lester? Eventually, I say. I pick up Milo this Saturday, going to rebuild that toy truck alternator with him. Explain things as best I can. That boy's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. I leave the diary on her porch table. She can burn it, keep it, or bury it in her garden. The words inside already did their work. The truth doesn't need leather binding anymore. January 20th arrives quiet and cold. I wake at 6 a.m. in my independent apartment. Old habit unchanged. The place is small, one-bedroom kitchen, barely big enough for a table and 2 chairs. But it's mine. Paid for with pension funds and Social Security, not joint accounts or co-ownership covenants. I make fresh coffee. Real coffee this time. Medium roast bought from the grocery store on sale. Nothing fancy. It smells like morning should smell: warm, bitter, uncomplicated. I stand by the kitchen window watching Canton streets wake up under gray clouds. No bank statements to review. No mortgage auto pay to verify. No hidden accounts to track, no forgery to fear, no conspiracy to unravel. Just coffee. Just January light through clean windows. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic on 12th Street. My phone sits on the counter silent. No calls from attorneys or accountants or FBI agents. The last text is from Nettie, sent 3 days ago. Furnace repair scheduled Tuesday, 2 p.m. if you want to be present. I didn't respond. The co-ownership agreement requires her to notify me of major repairs. It doesn't require conversation. I sip my coffee. It tastes better than the instant stuff, still not great, but better, good enough. Peace isn't a trumpet. It's the sound of morning light on clean windows. It's coffee you chose yourself. It's a phone that doesn't buzz with crisis every 90 minutes. I think about the last 8 months. May's heart attack, June's refinance discovery, July's detective work, August through November gathering evidence, December's confrontation and arrests, January's legal resolution. 245 days from catastrophe to covenant, from forgery to federal sentencing, from married man to separate bedroom co-owner to independent apartment renter. And at the end of it all, one promise left to keep. Saturday at 10, Milo coming over. We'll sit at this tiny kitchen table with the toy truck alternator spread out between us, wires and gears and plastic housing, and I'll explain what happened to his father. I'll use small words for big betrayals. I'll answer the questions he's brave enough to ask. I'll rebuild trust the same way we'll rebuild that alternator, one piece at a time. Checking connections, making sure everything fits right before moving forward. The coffee grows lukewarm in my hands. Outside, Canton wakes up slowly, headlights cutting through gray dawn, exhaust plumes rising from cold engines, a garbage truck rumbling down the block. Ordinary Tuesday morning, ordinary life. Turns out peace sounds like nothing at all. I rinse my mug in the sink. Check the calendar hanging on the refrigerator. January 20th, circled in blue ink, Saturday the 25th, marked with Milo 10 a.m. in my careful handwriting. 5 days, 120 hours, 7,200 minutes until I keep my promise. I stand at my apartment window, coffee mug warm in my hands, watching Canton wake up under gray January clouds. Saturday at 10. A 9-year-old boy with questions. A toy alternator that needs rebuilding. The only numbers that matter now are the hours until I keep my promise. Some conversations can't wait for perfect weather. I sign my grandson's future in black ink on a Tuesday afternoon while winter light slants through Alvin's office window. Saturday comes, but not before this. Not before securing what matters most. Alvin's office smells like old leather and coffee grounds. The trust documents spread across his mahogany desk catch afternoon sun, 23 pages of legal language that distill down to one simple promise. Milo Ramsey will have an education no one can steal. 80,000, Alvin says, tapping the signature line with his fountain pen. Untouchable, earmarked for education only. No one can claim it but Milo when he turns 18. Not Ross, not Nettie, not creditors' lawsuits or family emergencies. $80,000. Liquidated from accounts tied to the fraud prosecution money meant to finance my displacement, now financing my grandson's future instead. I pick up the pen. It's heavy real metal, not cheap plastic, the kind of pen that knows what it's signing. The Milo Ramsey Educational Trust, I read aloud. The words taste like redemption. I sign, clear, deliberate, my own hand, my own name, my own choice. Alvin witnesses, adds his signature below mine, embosses the notary seal with a satisfying mechanical thunk. He'll never know what it cost to protect this, I say quietly. Alvin sets down his pen, removes his reading glasses. At 71, he looks tired but steady, the way old oak looks after a long winter. Maybe that's the whole point. We shake hands. Then he pulls me into an embrace, two old men in a law office on a Tuesday afternoon. One who built the case, one who had the courage to use it. You did good, Lester, he says. Not just with the case, with this. I drive home with the trust documents in a manila envelope on my passenger seat. Legal protection for a 9-year-old who still believes adults tell the truth. Maybe he'll keep believing it a little longer now. Saturday morning arrives cold and clear. Milo sits at my kitchen table, small hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. I make scrambled eggs, butter, salt, pepper, nothing fancy. Toast pops up golden brown. He's wearing his Spider-Man sweatshirt, the one with the small hole in the left sleeve that he refuses to let anyone repair. We eat in comfortable silence. Milo swings his legs under the chair, feet don't reach the floor yet. Outside, Canton wakes up slow under gray January sky. He looks up from his eggs, brown eyes serious beneath dark bangs. Grandpa, are you happy? The same question he asked me in the tool shed under Christmas lights. This time I don't perform the answer. This time I don't buy silence with secrecy or certainty I don't feel. I smile, genuine. I'm happy, kiddo, I say. My coffee is still hot. He grins, gaps where baby teeth used to be adult teeth growing in crooked. That's a weird way to say you're happy. Maybe, I admit, but it's true. He reaches for another piece of toast. I sip my coffee. It's still warm. In the end, that's the only number that matters. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Silence isn't always weakness, and patience isn't always surrender. For 42 years, I stayed quiet when I should have asked questions. I trusted without verifying. I assumed family meant loyalty. Don't make my mistake. When something feels wrong, when numbers don't add up, pay attention to that instinct. I ignored mine for too long. By the time I found proof, I'd already lost 8 years of security. Here's what family betrayal taught me. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes the best revenge is simply protecting what's yours and walking away with your integrity intact. When you face betrayal from people you trusted most, you have a choice. Become bitter or become strategic. I chose strategy. I documented everything. I built my case quietly. And when the time was right, I acted. I believe God put me through this trial to show me that truth always surfaces, no matter how deep you bury it. Family betrayal and revenge consumed others. I chose a different path. The lesson isn't about punishment, it's about refusing to become what hurt you. If this story made you think, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted them or handled it differently? If you know someone going through family betrayal, share this story with them. And if you're new here, please subscribe to Dad's Silent Revenge for more true stories about standing up when it matters most. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Just a reminder, certain details in this story have been fictionalized for privacy and storytelling purposes. What's real is the message, and I hope it stays with you. God bless.